All right, glad to know you're still there with us. Earlier, we looked at the decision by the US Fed to reduce interest rates. And I asked the question earlier, which is the fact that at what age would you introduce smartphones to your kids? As a parent, you know, and I asked that question earlier, and like I said, I would love to have your feedback. I would love to have your comments. There's been this concern globally for parents. What will be the impact of introducing smartphones to kids? And the concern is, at what age will you consider it to be safe, to be ethical, to be right, to ensure that your kids have smartphones? What will be the advantage of that? What will be the disadvantage of that? What will be the merit and the demerit of that? What could be the possible positive impact of that, and the negativity that could also be attached to the use of smartphones by kids? That will be the thrust of our conversation now. And I'm being joined by my colleague Sade Uweh, who is also passionate about this conversation. Maybe I'm going to start by you telling us your own experience. That's Shadi, glad to have you join us.
Yes, thank you very much, Femi.
Yeah, it's Friday. So let's look at how we can talk about this in a manner that it will look more interactive.
Yes.
Isn't it? Now, the concern globally for parents has been that at what age will I consider it to be safe, looking at the psychological impact, the emotional impact, even the financial impact, and looking at the kind of addiction that also come with the use of smartphones, what you call homophobia, addiction to smartphones. But globally, there's been this research that parents are concerned, and they're asking that question. If you search on Google, you see questions like that: at what age can I introduce smartphones to my kids? So there's been that concern. How do you react to that?
Okay, basically, there are different factors, you need to consider, when it comes to this topic now. Maturity of the child, the necessity, the social context, and the family dynamics. So, for instance, they have assignments in school. The kids are in school in Nigerian setting from 2 years old upwards. And then when they're 5 years old, they have assignments to do and they need the internet. So what happens when the child is at home and he has to do his assignment to submit the next day? What this means is that he needs access to the smartphone. But thankfully, we have guidelines. We have apps that will, they have controls, parental controls on phones, which means that even though the child has access to the phone, he doesn't have access to certain sites. That's our concern as parents or as teachers, you understand. And then people think that children have access to phones just because they want to be on social media or they want to have access to social media. So for a certain age, probably say when you're under 14, you have parental guidelines. You have, apps that will, put a check on what you can watch as a child. So it depends on the parents, it depends on the environment where the child is, because really we say that information can be gotten from the phones. Digital age, everybody needs a phone. So for me, I would say that when you're 5 years old, but it must be controlled.
All right.
Yes.
It's usually like not a one cap fits all thing, because what could be, it's relative. If you're saying 5 years to some people, it could be 10 to some, it could be 11. I'm trying to look at what happened in my own situation while growing up. I never had access to phones. In fact, there were no smartphones.
So you in the digital age?
I could say maybe an hybrid, because then there was this desktop kind of phones where, if at a point where we needed to make calls those days, you have to get to Niger office and the rest of that. You can't do that. There were no smartphones. All those cable that you have to, attach to your homes, and then you make what you call land phones and all that. But I never had access to phones until when I got to university, and I think that was the time GSM came into Nigeria. So mine could be very different from what we have now. Children now are expected to go to the internet, to
source for information.
But let's situate it. Now in the US, there was a research that was done in the US by a media organization that 53% of kids in US, they never had access to smartphones until between the age of 11 and 12.
And 12, okay.
Now you could play the US environment to be different from our own, but looking at the peculiarity of our environment and the kind of distractions that could occur with the use of smartphones.
Okay.
You can claim you're using smartphones for research and education, but it's also an open door for you to go to other social media platforms and all that, and even sites that are peculiar to not be healthy for kids. You talk about parental control. So
Yes.
let's establish that. When you have a smartphone, it's exclusive to you. So there are times or instances where your parents are not there to supervise or to control. How does that become a challenge for parents who want to ensure that control? For TV, for certain music or some certain movies, you have PG, parental
Yes.
control and all that, which is, always legislated. So it means for a kid to watch that kind of movie, you have to have a parent supervising that kind of kid. But for mobile phones, sometimes these kids are in school and you're not there with them.
The teachers are there.
Okay.
Yes, the teachers are there. In fact, I do know that most schools do not allow phones during the school hours, and even if they do, it is controlled, So, and then let's, like you said, let's establish another scenario where these kids take the phones, unapproved into the schools without the prying eyes of the parents and prying eyes, of the teachers. What happens? I said first that maturity matters. Before you can give a child access to a phone, you should be able to know the psychological makeup. You should be able to know what that child is capable of doing. We do know that kids can be funny at some point, but you know your child. Your teacher doesn't know your child best. You as a parent, to an extent, probably 80%, you will know your child, what is capable of. If you know that your child, given a phone, would definitely go on sites that are not approved, for him, then he doesn't have access at all. You don't give him access. Like we say here, when you train a child, you train him with consequences. I give you a phone, you do this, or you go contrary to my instructions, then you don't have access to that phone. And culture plays a big role for us here in Nigeria. We know how it is. You don't come here and say, oh, I have because I am a citizen of a certain country, or because I'm a child, I have certain rights, that's not within, the holds of my parents, it's not within the purview of my parents, like we have over there. You understand? So basically, it is the maturity of the child. And then it is a necessity. I said that before. Kids should have phones. It comes down to you limiting the access. You control the timing. If you know that your child is going to be maybe a truant with the access phone, you give him the access only when you're available. And then you can monitor.
Let me give you a picture of what a friend of mine did recently, because we're having this kind of conversation, as parents, that what would be the impact of introducing smart kids?
Yes.
I mean, smartphones to kids. You know what he did? He decided not to buy what you call smartphones. Okay. These regular phones, what in local parlance is called palasa. Okay. So that was what he decided to buy for them. So they wouldn't have access to internet or the social media platforms. So all they could do is to send text messages and also make phone calls. Now, why he did that was to make it easier for him to be able to reach them, or for them to be able to reach the parents.
I think that's the staple in most homes. They have a phone, probably landline.
But do you consider that to be, do you know how it feels? Let's also address the issue of social impact of this, the status thing. When you have a particular kind of phone, I don't want to mention a name,
a brand.
If a brand, a phone that's in vogue, it's like a status thing. It makes you feel it's adding glam to your identity. Do you know how it feels when your phone is missing? You feel like your world is collapsing, because that's where your network is, your contact
age. So everything is there in your phone. Yes.
So, but with the point I'm trying to make is, if that is attached to the use of smartphones, wouldn't that also be a challenge for kids when you're trying to regulate? They feel, okay, you're trying to not make them feel like they are peers who have access to kids, rather than you're trying to instill in, sense of responsibility into them. Some might even feel, okay, you are depriving them of their right, or the kind of wealth they should enjoy. For parents, okay, I can afford it, I can buy it, but they are not also looking at the implication on the children. So how will you help your kids to understand that you're doing this in their own interest compared to other kids who have access to it? Then you also talk about the issue of maturity. Maturity is not a function of age, but sometimes age plays a role. for some kids, their maturity, maybe when between the age of 5 and 7, that could start. For some, maybe when they get to 10. Like the research will
15.
make reference to in the US, that most kids in the US, they didn't have access to smartphones until age 11 and
11.
12. That's about 53% of the population. Here in Nigeria, we might be struggling with the data. We might not have the right data to be able to back up this kind of conversation.
Yes.
But if you make a reference from that, would you say it's easier for parents to actually convince their kids that yes, they are doing this in their own interest?
Yes, the family dynamics is a major factor, on this issue of access to phones for kids. I know my child, I know what works in my family. In fact, there are actually families that do not have smartphones. You understand? So it's not a function of a child says, because my peers have a phone, I am supposed to have a phone, or I must have a phone because my
So,
peers have a phone. No, it's my home. I'm the parent. I should know better. I set down my rules. I know what works for you. I know what is good for you at every point in time. And then I provide the phone for you, and I make you understand the do's and the don'ts. And I tell people, children are human beings. You will speak to them. You're not going to dump, your perceptions on what's on the damages that the smartphone can cause, on their psyche. No, you would have a discussion with them. You relate with them like you're relating with an adult, and then they get to understand why you were saying, look, I'm giving you 2 hours to access this phone. Yes, you could go on social media, on some social sites, but you could not do this, you could not do that. X-rated adverts, you're not allowed to watch. You understand? So it's a family dynamic. It's your home. You set the rules. You know what you want. You make them understand. And then this is not foolproof because, there are some kids that you would tell them everything in this world, the peer pressure is there. The influence is there from other kids, and then they get to interact with other people in the outside world. So you do your best as a parent, give them the phone, hoping that, they would, adhere to what the knowledge and the discipline you have instilled in them.
I'm sure some parents will still not agree with you, given the fact that, the kind of psychological,
Yes.
let's look at the negativity that comes with it, or the other side to it, in terms of the exposure to cyberbullying, the exposure to X-rated content and all that. Now, how do you help your kids? Now, you are painting a picture that
Yes.
smartphones should be handed over to kids. Let's say we've handed over smartphones to them now, and then that will also increase the tendency to exposure to what we call cyberbullying. So if that happens, which is about a psychological, emotional age, which has nothing to do with age now, how do you help your kids to overcome this kind of attraction or distraction that could come maybe as a result of the exposure to the internet? You can't have access to the internet without using smartphones.
That's true.
So how do you help them to prepare or build them for that kind of exposure, the kind of psychological, emotional trauma that might come as a result of using the smartphone, having access to the internet, which increases the tendency for
Like I
cyberbullying?
always say that awareness is key.
Yeah.
Knowledge is key. You have a child, you want to have that discussion, parent to child discussion. You have it every day. You don't have to wait for anything to happen, anything negative or negative stories to happen before you sit your child down. Look, we're adults. And then we know that, hypothetically speaking, we know what can happen in future. We can predict. With data, we can predict certain scenarios that can happen. So we are saying that if we give you a phone, these are the possible things that could come up, and then we'll prepare the child, in case such things happen. You understand? So for me saying that I give my child a phone, Femi, life happens sometimes. With all the guidelines that we put, with all the control apps that we have, with all the limiting screen time that we have, life would happen in some cases. But what we can do as parents, is to mitigate those things, to reduce it. We're not saying it's not going to happen one day, where they're going to have access to certain sites that even we as adults would not want to look at. But what we do as parents is to teach them so that we can limit, the things, the issues, the negative issues, the vices that we know that can happen when you have access, unauthorized access to smartphones.
All right, Sade, I must confess you're doing well. We're not done yet,
Yes.
but we just need to go on a short break. Let's see if that will give us opportunity to be able to take comments from our viewers. So as a parent, you're watching, would like to have your comments. What's your take on the introduction of smartphones to kids? At what age will you consider it to be very healthy, to be very suitable for kids to have access to smartphones? I'd love to have your comments. All you just have to do is to go on all our social media platforms, Facebook, X, just search for Atsuk News TV. Just put your comment there. And before we wrap up the program, I would love to take your comments. And so we'll do that after this break. Just stay with us.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Mr. Early Exchange, I'm glad to know you're still there with us. We're still looking at what age will you consider it to be suitable to introduce smartphones to kids due to smartphone addictions, what you call nomophobia. And this has been concerns for parents globally because they're looking at what age will parents introduce smartphones to kids. They're looking at the negative impact, the positive impact, and what should be done to ensure that kids are prepared for this kind of narrative. I still have Sade here with me, having this kind of discussion with me. Sade, glad to know you're still here with us. All right. It's a great one. Now, let's look at another side to this, which is the fact that these will help kids to have access to the right data, statistics, information needed for education. Yes. Let's look at the education, the positive side to it now. How do we ensure that it's also not given for distractions? As much as you will say, okay, this kids needs access to internet to be able to do their homework, assignments, to do research, projects, and some other things. We're in the digital age where the smartphone is another library, it's a school on its own, which is a form of positivity. But how do we ensure that it also gives room to what we call it brings what we call sense of focus, avoid distraction, and the readiness of the mind for these kids to be able to withstand the distraction that could also come with smartphones? Talk to us.
Okay, so you would have to lead by example.
Yeah.
As an adult, you would when you have access, when you have your phone, your kids, copy whatever you do. If you are the type who would be on the phone all day watching various stuff, that you wouldn't even want your kids to watch. They know these things, so you would have to practice, positive
as adults, even adults are struggling with that. Now we're talking about kids.
You see these are sacrifices that we make as adults. When you have kids with you or around you or within your, your vicinity, you become responsible for them. So it's not about what you think, you are entitled to watch. It's about the message you're going to pass across to the kids watching you, so you need positive conversations, communications, with the children. You have to teach them online safety. It's like I said before, it's a discussion. You make them know, because you're not always going to be there when they have access to that phone. So what do? And then like we said about the controls, the guidelines, there's something you can do. You can connect your own phone with their phone, I think on a Gmail app or something like that. And then you can actually, control what they watch.
And they
what they have access to. So
and even
there's so many. There's so
yes, that can be installed
on the phone.
That will prevent them going to unwanted sites and things like that.
And now the question would be, how do you stop them from seeing stuff on phones of other kids? Because you have only the priority over your child. You do not have that control over another child.
I think it's also important.
You understand?
Yeah.
So, you're teaching somebody the right way at home. They go outside there, to the outside world, and they have access to things that, you have cut off from their life, on 100%. So how do you combat that? So that's another great discussion that you should have maybe some other time.
No, it's also, I agree with you. It's important because you prepare them for the tax time, because these are kids, they will grow up. have their own space, have their own apartment, if possible, get to university. And that's what happens when some kids, when they are grown now, what they didn't enjoy while growing up now, they now
That's
grow
another thing.
wide
Yes,
when they have access to it. Maybe they're in the
I agree.
university.
I agree.
Maybe someone who has not been staying alone now, you're in the university, you have the opportunity to stay alone. You
Well,
have
that's why
access
we
to
say that, you expose them early.
but yeah, it's that's why the education is good, and it has to come at a very early age. At this time, they're with you. You educate them, you inform them, and also prepare them for the tax side because you'll get to the larger world where these things are like norm. And then they need to prepare emotionally, psychologically for this kind of narrative so that when they get there, they know what to do. I agree with you. It's like you're asking so much from parents, but there's nothing so much for parents. It's as parents, you're expected at that role to provide that supervisory function.
Yes.
And I am very sure by the time parents do that, it's easier for kids to be able to
That
manage
parents
them.
too need education on stuff like this.
Yeah, sure. That's why. Which is
Yes.
part of why we're having this
Yes,
conversation.
parents too need education.
But looking
because
at this development, do you think it's been necessary to legislate this? Maybe we can have a policy in this regard, maybe a bill being sponsored in this regard, or a law or intervention of the state or the government as regards policy guiding the use of or the introduction of smartphone to kids.
that discussion would be with the phone makers. You understand? If they want to have a policy, say, what, there will be a certain type of phone for kids. It has data and all that you need, but then it's only for educational basis. You understand?
Yeah.
So I'm not a phone maker, so I don't know how
it's
that
possible.
can work.
You
But
are-
that's one of the things.
you're selling a
they can
business
look-
idea.
Yes, to say, look, this type of phone or this type of tab, this is what it allows. For this age grade, maybe from 4 years to 6 years or from 4 years to 10 years. This is the only, and then you will show as the parent that nothing else, that you do not approve is going to come on that phone. I don't know how possible that
Even the
would be, but
regular
then
phone can be configured.
we know that's configured. Yeah, we know that
to
nothing
achieve
is
that.
impossible.
Yeah, nothing is possible.
Yeah,
What
with
I'm,
this age, nothing
what I'm
is
trying to
possible.
say is to see maybe a be sponsored in this regard, but let's
It's
go back
about
to
the phone that I buy for my
yeah.
own child.
But if that will happen,
That's
and
that's my business as a parent. That's my business.
so it's more
Except maybe they want to have a policy, for with the schools. But I think that I'm in control of what happens in my house. The government has no right to tell me what happens in my house, within the confines of my household that I pay rent for.
All right, let's talk about the role of teachers now. Talk about school owners, the impact they're going to have on these. Would you expect the kind of orientation that also help kids to understand the devices associated with the use of smartphones to also be something that could be introduced to them while in school? They give them that education, lectures, and counseling as regards what might like
I mean, basically, for let's say 120 days in a year, your kids are with their teachers for nothing
they
less
see as role models.
nothing
most
less
of the
than
time.
6 hours or 7 hours. So believe you me, they are shaping your children. If you don't shape them, your teachers
Oh,
are
sure.
the ones shaping your kids more because they are basically with them every other day. So the first port of call is, yes, the parents, but the teachers, the bulk of the work falls on them. And then if we don't appreciate them as teachers, if we don't even understand that they need the education, the awareness, that goes into the positive usage of smartphones for kids, then whatever we do at home is not going to be a success.
Great. All right. I think we just have to leave this conversation here. But as we wrap up, what would be your advice to parents? For some who don't have the right knowledge to educate, it's one thing for most parents, some of them, don't let me use the word most, some do not even know how the smartphone works. For some, I'm not saying all, maybe for those who are not digitally exposed. So what would be your advice or piece of advice to parents like that and parents generally as regards the concern to the introduction of smartphones to kids?
Okay, so for the parents, they need to be aware, they need to be educated. With education, with the right knowledge, right access to knowledge as a parent, your kids will turn out well. Because in a case where, in a sort of digital age where it's the child that is teaching the parent, there's going to be a problem.
All right. Shadi, I must thank you for your time
Thank you
and
very
your
much,
thoughts
Femi,
on
for
this
having me.
development. No doubt you are gradually becoming a consultant now.
Oh, really? You have to get paid for that.
All right, thank you so much for your time.
Thank
It's
you.
Friday. Want to believe you're going to have a nice weekend.
We're busy though. We're
Uh,
all busy in the
You're
office.
looking it anyway. All right, what a way to wrap up our conversation today. We've been talking about the proper age to introduce smartphones to kids. Earlier, we started by looking at the decision of the U.S. Federal Reserve to cut interest rates from 5.25% to 4.75%, and the implication of that on the U.S. economy for consumers and also for business entities. Thereafter, we talked about the issues related to smartphones. And my take is, as parents, let's ensure that we supervise our kids. There might not be absolutely a particular age, related to it's relative depending on the level of maturity or the emotional maturity of your kids, but ensure that you prepare them for the other side, which might be emotional, psychological, that also has to come with the use of smartphones. There's been a concern globally, but let's hope that this concern will be handled as more parents educate themselves, even on the use of these smartphones, and do the right thing. And hopefully, our kids will be safe when it comes to the issue of using smartphones. This is going to be our offering for today, and also our offering for this week. It's Friday. For those who missed the earlier conversation, you can do a catch up on our YouTube channel. Just search at Soup News TV. There you find us. And don't forget, Market Insight comes up at 11. I remain Femi Ayodele. Thanks for watching. Enjoy your weekend.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.